Hey, what's up? Alex joining the roster is the headline. He brings that grappler-ish pressure with stance transitions and more command throw options, but the real story here is how Capcom used his arrival as the hook to push through a roster-wide rebalance that touches neutral combos and some of the funky edge case inputs that used to make high-level play inconsistent. What's clever about this patch is that it doesn't just nerf or buff a handful of characters. Capcom went for systemic fixes that affect how the whole game feels. Neutral attacks have been tuned up across the board, so there are more viable ways to approach without having the match collapse into one or two dominant tools. They also expanded combo routes, not by slapping on more damage, but by adjusting hitboxes, hurtboxes, and juggle windows so creative follow-ups are less likely to drop. The goal seems to be to keep each character's identity while reducing the one move solves everything problem that some matchups had. One of the most talked about mechanical changes is the drive rush overhead standardization. Overhead attacks performed from drive rush are now universally -3 frames on block, and the post-block situations were unified. So what used to be wildly different outcomes depending on the character or side are now consistent. They also adjusted pushback distances on block, so you can't easily convert an overhead into a normal throw or a chain of lights unless it was meant to be part of that character's feel. And so that means overheads remain useful as low-risk guard breakers, but you won't see an overhead instantly convert into a full pressure loop unless that character already had that design baked in. That standardization alone shifts how people use drive rush and neutral and resets certain safe jump pressure expectations. Some specific characters were called out for the overhead frame tweaks, named like Ryu, Chun-Li, AKI, Akuma, Terry, Elena, and Sagat popped up as being affected. And there's also a longer list for adjusted block distances that includes folks like Luke, Jamie, Kimberly, Marisa, Lily, JP, Jury, and several classics such as E. Honda, Blanca, Guile, Rashid, M. Basin, Terry, Mai, Sagat, and Sea Viper. If your main is on that list, expect certain pressure strings to lose or gain follow-up opportunities depending on spacing and timing. These are the kinds of changes that don't always feel dramatic at first, but they ripple through matchups and practice routines. On the inputs and control side, they made improvements that genuinely help players who rely on tight timing. Drive rush input behavior now treats an up input during the drive rush screen freeze as a jump in neutral situations, and input buffering during that freeze has been improved to prevent missed jumps. Neutral jump inputs can also transition into forward or backward jumps if you add a directional input, which cleans up a lot of accidental inputs that used to punish proper reads. There's also an important reminder that some higher priority actions like special moves or drive impact still override jump inputs when they have priority, so the cancel rules haven't been thrown out, they just made the core jumping behavior more consistent. Wake-up options were given a little breathing room too. The buffer window during wake-up was increased by 3 frames, which on paper sounds small, but in practice means reversals and defensive tech come out more reliably when you actually intend them. Combined with fixes to cancel and input handling, for instance, situations where drive rush or drive impact inputs would fail to override previous inputs under specific conditions, these changes reduce those moments where the game seems to ignore you for no reason. That kind of polish is the difference between a game that rewards muscle memory and one where strange edge case bugs steal rounds from both players. The patch also reevaluated risk versus reward across key mechanics to make matchups feel fairer. Capcom didn't try to homogenize characters into the same mold. Instead, they nudged frame data, pushback, and hitbox windows to encourage diverse playstyles while preventing a tiny handful of tools from dominating the stage. For tournament players, this means matchups will need to be relearned in places where, say, a once safe string now leaves you at a disadvantage, or an underused normal now links into something meaningful in subset. Expect to see mid to high level sets start to display different approaches to neutral and corner situations as people adapt. I want to be clear, none of these are random micro adjustments. The patch is structured and intentional, and you can see Capcom trying to strike the balance between keeping things familiar and cleaning up competitive fairness. Some of the subtle changes, like the unified overhead disadvantage and block pushback tweaks, will matter more in tournament play and advanced training mode work than in casual matches. But they're the kind of adjustments that make the game feel more reliable when you put in lab time. In terms of how you actually approach practicing after this patch, it makes sense to revisit your character's string conversions and spacing, retest any overhead setups, and check whether your usual safe jump or frame trap still works at the same ranges.